Don't forget to subscribe. Afterwards, the wisest and most spiritual books from the greatest authors await you every day. And now buckle up, sit back and we'll begin. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. The Secret Doctrine. Stanza 7. 1. Behold the beginning of sentient formless life, A. First, the divine, B. The one from the mother spirit, then, the spiritual, C. The three from the one, D. The four from the one, E. And the 5, F. From which the 3, the 5 and the 7, G. These are the threefold and the fourfold downward, the mind-born sons of the first Lord, the shining 7. It is they who are thou, I, he, Olanu, they who watch over thee and thy mother, Bhumi. A. The hierarchy of creative powers is divided esoterically into 7, 4 and 3, within the 12 great orders, recorded in the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 7 of the manifesting scale being connected, moreover, with the 7 planets. All these are subdivided into numberless groups of divine spiritual, semi-spiritual, and ethereal beings. The chief hierarchies among these are hinted at in the Great Quaternary, or the 4 bodies and the 3 faculties exoterically, of Brahma and the Panchasya, the 5 Brahmas, or the 5 Dhyani Buddhas in the Buddhist system. The highest group is composed of the divine flames, so-called, also spoken of as the fiery lions, and the lions of life, whose esotericism is securely hidden in the zodiacal sign of Leo. It is the nucleole of the superior divine world. They are the formless fiery breaths, identical in one aspect with the upper sephirithal triad, which is placed by the Kabbalists in the archetypal world. The same hierarchy, with the same numbers, is found in the Japanese system, in the beginnings as taught by both the Shinto and the Buddhist sects. In this system, anthropogenesis precedes cosmogenesis, as the divine merges into the human and creates midway in its descent into matter the visible universe. The legendary personages, remarks reverentially à moi, having to be understood as the stereotyped embodiment of the higher secret doctrine and its sublime truths. To state this old system at full length would occupy too much of our space. A few words on it, however, cannot be out of place. The following is a short synopsis of this anthropocosmogenesis, and shows how closely the most separated nations echoed one and the same archaic teaching. When all was as yet chaos, Kan-tun, 3 spiritual beings appeared on the stage of future creation. Ain no Oni Nakanushi no Kami, divine monarch of the central heaven, Taka mi Anasubi no Kami, exalted, imperial divine offspring of heaven and earth, and Kama mi Musubi no Kami, offspring of the gods simply. These were without form or substance are Arupa triad, as neither the celestial nor the terrestrial substance had yet differentiated, nor had the essence of things been formed. B. In the Zohar, which, as now arranged and re-edited by Moses de Leon, with the help of Syrian and Chaldean Christian Gnostics, in the 8th century, and corrected and revised still later by many Christian hands, is only a little less exoteric than the Bible itself. This divine vehicle no longer appears as it does in the Chaldean Book of Numbers. True enough, Ein Sof, the absolute endless no thing, uses also the form of the One, the manifested heavenly man, the first cause, as its chariot, Merkaba, in Hebrew, Vahana, in Sanskrit, or vehicle, to descend into and manifest itself in the phenomenal world. But the Kabbalists neither make it plain how the Absolute can use anything or exercise any attribute whatever, since, as the Absolute, it is devoid of attributes, nor do they explain that in reality, it is the first cause, Plato's logos, the original and eternal idea, that manifests through Adam Kadmon, the second logos, so to speak. In the Book of Numbers, it is explained that Ain, or air, is the only self-existent, whereas its depth, the bythos of the Gnostics, called propator, is only periodical. The latter is Brahma, as differentiated from Brahman or Parabrahman. It is the depth, the source of light, or propator, which is the unmanifested logos, or the abstract idea, and not Ein Sof, whose ray uses Adam Kadmon male and female or the manifested logos, the objective universe, as a chariot through which to manifest. But in the Zohar we read the following incongruity. Senior occultatus est, et absconditus, microprosopus manifestus est, et non manifestus. This is a fallacy, since microprosopus, or the microcosm, can only exist during its manifestations and is destroyed during the Mahapralayas. Rosenroth's Kabbalah is no guide, but very often a puzzle. The first order are the divine. As in the Japanese system, in the Egyptian, and every old cosmogony at this divine flame, the one are lit the three descending groups. Having their potential being in the higher group, they now become distinct and separate entities. These are called the virgins of life, the great illusion, etc., etc., and collectively the six-pointed star. The latter, in almost every religion, is the symbol of the logos as the first emanation. It is the sign of Vishnu in India, the chakra or wheel, and the glyph of the tetragrammaton, he of the four letters in the Kabbalah, or metaphorically the limbs of microprosopus, which are 10 and 6 respectively. The later Kabbalists, however, especially the Christian mystics, have played sad havoc with this magnificent symbol. Indeed, the microprosopus, who is, philosophically speaking, quite distinct from the unmanifested eternal logos, one with the Father, has finally been brought, by centuries of incessant efforts of sophistry and of paradoxes, to be considered as one with Jehovah, or the one living God, whereas Jehovah is no better than Binah, a female Sephira. This fact cannot be too frequently impressed upon the reader. For the 10 limbs of the heavenly man are the 10 Sephiroth, but the first heavenly man is the unmanifested spirit of the universe, and ought never to be degraded into microprosopus, the lesser face or countenance, the prototype of man on the terrestrial plane. The microprosopus is, as just said, the logos manifested, and of such there are many. Of this, however, later on. The six-pointed star refers to the 6 forces or powers of nature, the 6 planes, principles, etc., etc., all synthesized by the 7th, or the central point in the star. All these, the upper and lower hierarchies included, emanate from the heavenly or celestial Virgin, the Great Mother in all religions, the androgyne, the Sephira Adam Kadmon. Sephira is the crown, Kether, in the abstract principle only, as a mathematical x, the unknown quantity. On the plane of differentiated nature, she is the female counterpart of Adam Kadmon, the first androgyne. The Kabbalah teaches that the words fiat lux referred to the formation and evolution of the Sephiroth, and not to light as opposed to darkness. Rabbi Simeon says, O companions, man as an emanation was both man and woman, Adam Kadmon verily, and this is the sense of the words, let there be light, and there was light. And this is the twofold man. In its unity, primordial light is the 7th, or highest, principle, Diviprakriti, the light of the unmanifested logos. but in its differentiation, it becomes Fohit, or the seven sons. The former is symbolized by the central point in the double triangle, the latter by the hexagon itself, or the 6 limbs of Microprosopus, the seventh being Malkuth, the bride of the Christian Kabbalists, or our earth. Hence the expressions. The first after the one is divine fire, the second, fire and ether, the third is composed of fire, ether and water, the fourth of fire, ether, water, and air. The one is not concerned with man-bearing globes, but with the inner, invisible spheres. The firstborn are the life, the heart and pulse of the universe, the second are its mind or consciousness. These elements of fire, air, etc., are not our compound elements, and this consciousness has no relation to our consciousness. The consciousness of the one manifested, if not absolute, is still unconditioned. Mahat, the universal mind, is the first production of the Brahma creator, but also of Pradhana undifferentiated matter. C. The second order of celestial beings, those of fire and ether, corresponding to spirit and soul, or Atma Buddhi, whose names are legion, are still formless, but more definitely substantial. They are the first differentiation in the secondary evolution or creation, a misleading word. As the name shows, they are the prototypes of the incarnating jivas or monads, and are composed of the fiery spirit of life. It is through these that passes, like a pure solar beam, the ray which is furnished by them with its future vehicle, the divine soul, Buddhi. These are directly concerned with the hosts of the higher world of our system. From these twofold units emanate the threefold. In the cosmogony of Japan, when, out of the chaotic mass, an egg-like nucleus appears, having within itself the germ and potency of all universal as well as of all terrestrial life, it is the threefold just named, which differentiate. The male ethereal principle, Yo, ascends, and the female grosser or more material principle, In, is precipitated into the universe of substance when a separation occurs between the celestial and the terrestrial. From this, the female, the mother, the first rudimentary objective being is born. It is ethereal, without form or sex, and yet it is from it and the mother that the 7 divine spirits are born, from whom will emanate the 7 creations, just as in the Codex Nazarius from Carabtanos and the Mother Spiritus, the 7 evilly disposed, material, spirits are born. It would be too long to give here the Japanese names, but in translation they stand in this order. 1. The invisible celibate, which is the creative logos of the non-creating Father or the creative potentiality of the latter made manifest. 2. The spirit or God of the rayless depths chaos, which becomes differentiated matter, or the world stuff, also the mineral realm. 3. The spirit of the vegetable kingdom of the abundant vegetation. 4. The spirit of the earth and the spirit of the sands, a being of dual nature, the former containing the potentiality of the male element, the latter that of the female element. These two were one, as yet unconscious of being two. In this duality were contained A. Isu no Gai no Kami, the male, dark and muscular being, and B. Eku Gai no Kami, the female, fair and weaker or more delicate being. Then 5 and 6. The spirits who were androgynous or dual-sexed. 7. The 7th spirit, the last emanated from the mother, appears as the first divine human form distinctly male and female. It was the 7th creation as in the Puranas, wherein man is the 7th creation of Brahma. These, Sanagit Sanami, descended into the universe by the celestial bridge, the Milky Way, and Tsunagi, perceiving far below a chaotic mass of cloud and water, thrust his jeweled spear into the depths, and dry land appeared. Then the two separated to explore Onokoro, the newly created island world. Amwa. Such are the Japanese exoteric fables, the rind that conceals the kernel of the same one truth of the secret doctrine. The third order correspond to Atma Buddhi Manas, spirit, soul and intellect, and are called the triads. The fourth order are substantial entities. This is the highest group among the rupas, atomic forms. It is the nursery of the human, conscious, spiritual souls. They are called the imperishable jivas and constitute, through the order below their own, the first group of the first septenary host, the great mystery of human, conscious and intellectual being. For the latter is the field wherein lies concealed, in its privation, the germ that will fall into generation. That germ will become the spiritual potency in the physical cell that guides the development of the embryo, and that is the cause of the hereditary transmission of faculties and all the inherent qualities in man. The Darwinian theory, however, of the transmission of acquired faculties is neither taught nor accepted in occultism. Evolution, in the latter, proceeds on quite other lines, the physical, according to esoteric teaching, evolving gradually from the spiritual, mental, and psychic. This inner soul of the physical cell, the spiritual plasm that dominates the germinal plasm, is the key that must open one day the gates of the terra incognita of the biologist, now called the dark mystery of embryology. It is worthy of notice that modern chemistry, while rejecting, as a superstition of occultism and religion as well, the theory of substantial and invisible beings, called angels, elementals, etc. Without, of course, having ever looked into the philosophy of these incorporeal entities, or thought over them, should, owing to observation and discovery, have been unconsciously forced to recognize and adopt the same ratio of progression and order in the evolution of chemical atoms as occultism does for both its Dionys and atoms, analogy being its first law. As seen above, the very first group of the Rupa angels is quaternary, an element being added to each in descending order. So also are the atoms, in the phraseology of chemistry, monatomic, diatomic, triatomic, tetratomic, etc., progressing downwards. Let it be remembered that the fire, water, and air of occultism, or the elements of primary creation so-called, are not the compound elements they are on earth, but nominal homogeneous elements, the spirits of the former. Then follow the septenary groups or hosts. Placed on parallel lines with the atoms in a diagram, the natures of these beings would be seen to correspond, in their downward scale of progression, to composite elements in a mathematically identical manner as to analogy. This refers, of course, only to diagrams made by occultists, for were the scale of angelic beings to be placed on parallel lines with the scale of the chemical atoms of science from the hypothetical helium down to uranium, they would of course be found to differ. For the latter have, as correspondents on the astral plane, only the four lowest orders, the three higher principles in the atom, or rather molecule, or chemical element, being perceptible to the initiated Dangma's eye alone. But then, if chemistry desired to find itself on the right path, it would have to correct its tabular arrangement by that of the occultists, which it might refuse to do. In esoteric philosophy, every physical particle corresponds to, and depends on, its higher noumen in the being to whose essence it belongs, and above is below. The spiritual evolves from the divine, the psycho-mental from the spiritual, tainted from its lower plane by the astral, the whole animate and, seemingly, inanimate nature, evolving on parallel lines and drawing its attributes from above as well as below. The number 7, as applied to the term septenary host, above mentioned, does not imply only 7 entities, but 7 groups or hosts, as explained before. The highest group, the asuras born in Brahma's first body, which turned into night, are septenary, i.e., divided like the Pitras into 7 classes, 3 of which are bodiless, arupa, and 4 with bodies. They are in fact more truly our Pitras, ancestors, than the Pitras who projected the first physical man. The 5th order is a very mysterious one, as it is connected with the microcosmic pentagon, the 5-pointed star, representing man. In India and Egypt, these Dhyanas were connected with the crocodile, and their abode is in Capricornus. But these are convertible terms in Indian astrology, for the 10th sign of the zodiac, which is called Makara, is loosely translated crocodile. The word itself is occultly interpreted in various ways, as will be shown further on. In Egypt, the defunct whose symbol is the pentagram, or the 5-pointed star, the points of which represent the limbs of a man, was shown emblematically transformed into a crocodile. Sebek or Sevik or 7th, as Mr. Gerald Massey says, showing it to be the type of intelligence, is a dragon in reality, not a crocodile. He is the dragon of wisdom or manas, the human soul, mind, the intelligent principle, called in our esoteric philosophy the 5th principle. Says the defunct Asirified in the Book of the Dead, or ritual, under the glyph of a mummiform god with a crocodile's head. I am the crocodile presiding at the fear, I am the god crocodile, at the arrival of his soul among men. I am the god crocodile brought for destruction. An allusion to the destruction of divine spiritual purity when man acquires the knowledge of good and evil, also to the fallen gods, or angels of every theogony. I am the fish of the great Horus. As Makara is the crocodile, the vehicle of Varuna. I am merged in Sekhem. This last sentence gives the corroboration and repeats the doctrine of esoteric Buddhism, for it alludes directly to the 5th principle, manas, or the most spiritual part of its essence rather, which merges into, is absorbed by, and made one with Atma Buddhi, after the death of man. For Sekhem is the residence, or loka, of the god Kem, Horus Osiris, or father and son, hence the devachan of Atma Buddhi. In the Book of the Dead, the defunct is shown entering into Sekhem, with Horus thought, and emerging from it as pure spirit. Thus the defunct says, I see the forms of myself, as various men transforming eternally. I know this chapter. He who knows it takes all kinds of living forms. And addressing in magic formula that which is called, in Egyptian esotericism, the ancestral heart or the reincarnating principle, the permanent ego, the defunct says, O my heart, my ancestral heart, necessary for my transformations, do not separate thyself from me before the guardian of the scales. Thou art my personality within my breast, divine companion watching over my flesh's bodies. It is in Sekhem that lies concealed the mysterious face or the real man concealed under the false personality, the triple crocodile of Egypt, the symbol of the higher trinity, or human triad, Atma, Buddhi and Manas. One of the explanations of the real though hidden meaning of this Egyptian religious glyph is easy. The crocodile is the first to await and meet the devouring fires of the morning sun, and very soon came to personify the solar heat. When the sun arose, it was like the arrival on earth, and among men, of the divine soul which informs the gods. Hence the strange symbolism. The mummy donned the head of a crocodile to show that it was a soul arriving from the earth. In all the ancient papyri, the crocodile is called Sebek, seventh. Water also symbolizes the fifth principle esoterically, and, as already stated, Mr. Gerald Massey shows that the crocodile was the seventh soul, the supreme one of seven, the seer unseen. Even exoterically, Sekhem is the residence of the god Kem, and Kem is Horus avenging the death of his father Osiris, hence punishing the sins of man when he becomes a disembodied soul. Thus the defunct Osirified became the god Kem, who gleans the field of Enru, that is, he gleans either his reward or punishment, for that field is the celestial locality, Devachan, where the defunct is given wheat, the food of divine justice. The fifth group of celestial beings is supposed to contain in itself the dual attributes of both the spiritual and physical aspects of the universe, the two poles, so to say, of Mahat, the universal intelligence, and the dual nature of man, the spiritual and the physical. Hence its number 5, doubled and made into 10, connecting it with Makara, the 10th sign of the zodiac. The 6th and 7th orders partake of the lower qualities of the quaternary. They are conscious ethereal entities, as invisible as ether, which are shot out, like the boughs of a tree, from the first central group of the four, and shoot out in their turn numberless side groups, the lower of which are the nature spirits, or elementals, of countless kinds and varieties, from the formless and unsubstantial, the ideal thoughts of their creators, down to atomic, though, to human perception, invisible organisms. The latter are considered as the spirits of atoms, for they are the first remove, backwards, from the physical atom sentient, if not intelligent creatures. They are all subject to karma, and have to work it out through every cycle. For, as the doctrine teaches, there are no such privileged beings in the universe, whether in our own or in other systems, in the outer or the inner worlds, as the angels of the Western religion and the Judean. A Dayan Chohan has to become one. He cannot be born or appear suddenly on the plane of life as a full-blown angel. The celestial hierarchy of the present Manvantara will find itself transferred, in the next circle of life, into higher superior worlds, and will make room for a new hierarchy, composed of the elect ones of our mankind. Being is an endless cycle within the one absolute eternity, wherein move numberless inner cycles finite and conditioned. Gods, created as such, would evince no personal merit in being gods. Such a class of beings perfect only by virtue of the special immaculate nature inherent in them and the face of suffering and struggling humanity, and even of the lower creation, would be the symbol of an eternal injustice quite satanic in character, an ever-present crime. It is an anomaly and an impossibility in nature. Therefore the 4 and the 3 have to incarnate as all other beings have. This sixth group, moreover, remains almost inseparable from man, who draws from it all but his highest and lowest principles, or his spirit and body, the 5 middle human principles being the very essence of those Dionysus. Paracelsus calls them the Flagi, the Christians, the guardian angels, the occultists, the ancestors, the Pitras. They are the 6-fold Dayan Chohans, having the 6 spiritual elements in the composition of their bodies, in fact, men, minus the physical body alone, The divine ray, the Atman, proceeds directly from the One. When asked how this can be, how is it possible to conceive that these gods or angels can be at the same time their own emanations and their personal selves? Is it in the same sense as in the material world, where the Son is, in one way, his Father, being his blood, the bone of his bone and the flesh of his flesh? To this the teachers answer, verily it is so. But one has to go deep into the mystery of being before one can fully comprehend this truth. 2. The one ray multiplies the smaller rays. Life precedes form, and life survives the last atom. Through the countless rays the life ray, the one, like a thread through many beads. This shloka expresses the conception of purely Vedantic one, as already explained elsewhere, of a life thread, Sutratma, running through successive generations. How, then, can this be explained? By resorting to a simile, to a familiar illustration, though necessarily imperfect, as all our available analogies must be. Before resorting to it, however, I would ask whether it seems unnatural, least of all supernatural to any one of us, when we consider the process of the growth and development of a fetus into a healthy baby weighing several pounds. Evolving from what? From the segmentation of an infinitesimally small ovum and a spermatozoon. And afterwards we see the baby develop into a 6-foot man. This refers to the atomic and physical expansion. From the microscopically small into something exceedingly large, from the unseen, to the naked eye, into the visible and objective. Science has provided for all this, and, I dare say, her theories, embryological, biological and physiological, are correct enough, so far as exact observation of the material goes. Nevertheless, the two chief difficulties of the science of embryology, namely, what are the forces at work in the formation of the fetus, and the cause of hereditary transmission of likeness, physical, moral or mental, have never been properly answered, nor will they ever be solved, till the day when scientists condescend to accept the occult theories. But if this physical phenomenon astonishes no one, except in so far as it puzzles the embryologists, why should our intellectual and inner growth, the evolution of the human spiritual to the divine spiritual, be regarded as, or seem, more impossible than the other? The materialists and the evolutionists of the Darwinian school would be ill-advised to accept the newly worked-out theories of Professor Weissmann. The author of Beiträge zur Des und Enzlehre, with regard to one of the two mysteries of embryology, as above specified, which he seems to think he has solved, for, when it is fully solved, science will have stepped into the domain of the truly occult, and passed forever out of the realm of transformation, as taught by Darwin. The two theories are irreconcilable from the standpoint of materialism. Regarded from that of the occultists, however, the new theory solves all these mysteries. Those who are not acquainted with the discovery of Professor Weissmann, at one time a fervent Darwinist, ought to hasten to repair the deficiency. The German embryologist philosopher, stepping over the heads of the Greek Hippocrates and Aristotle, right back into the teachings of the old Aryans, shows one infinitesimal cell, out of millions of others at work in the formation of an organism, alone and unaided, determining, by means of constant segmentation and multiplication, the correct image of the future man, or animal, in its physical, mental and psychic characteristics. It is this cell which impresses on the face and form of the new individual the features of the parents, or of some distant ancestor. It is this cell, again, which transmits to him the intellectual and mental idiosyncrasies of his sires, and so on. This plasm is the immortal portion of our bodies, developing by means of a process of successive assimilations. Darwin's theory, viewing the embryological cell as the essence or extract from all other cells, is set aside. It is incapable of accounting for hereditary transmission. There are but two ways of explaining the mystery of heredity. Either the substance of the germinal cell is endowed with the faculty of crossing the whole cycle of transformations that lead to the construction of a separate organism, and then to the reproduction of identical germinal cells, or these germinal cells do not have their genesis at all in the body of the individual, but proceed directly from the ancestral germinal cell passed from father to son through long generations. It is the latter hypothesis that Weissman has adopted and worked upon, and it is to this cell that he traces the immortal portion of man. So far, so good, and when this almost correct theory is accepted, how will biologists explain the first appearance of this everlasting cell? Unless man grew like the immortal Topsy and was not born at all, but fell from the clouds, how was that embryological cell generated in him? Complete the physical plasm, mentioned above, the germinal cell of man with all its material potentialities, with the spiritual plasm, so to say, or the fluid that contains the 5 lower principles of the 6 principal dhyani, and you have the secret, if you are spiritual enough to understand it. Now to the promised simile. When the seed of the animal man is cast into the soil of the animal woman, that seed cannot germinate unless it has been fructified by the 5 virtues, the fluid of, or the emanation from, the principles of the 6-fold heavenly man. Wherefore the microcosm is represented as a pentagon within the hexagon star, the macrocosm. The functions of Jiva on this earth are of a 5-fold character. In the mineral atom, it is connected with the lowest principles of the spirits of the earth, the 6-fold dhyanas. In the vegetable particle, with their second, the prana, life. In the animal, with all these plus the third and the fourth. In man, the germ must receive the fruitage of all the 5. Otherwise he will be born no higher than an animal. Thus in man alone the jiva is complete. As to his 7th principle, it is but one of the beams of the universal sun, for each rational creature receives the temporary loan only of that which has to return to its source. As to his physical body, it is shaped by the lowest terrestrial lives, through physical, chemical and physiological evolution. The blessed ones have naught to do with the purgations of matter, says the Kabbalah in the Chaldean Book of Numbers. It comes to this. Mankind, in its first prototypal, shadowy form, is the offspring of the Elohim of life, Pitras. In its qualitative and physical aspect, it is the direct progeny of the ancestors, the lowest dhyanas, or spirits of the earth. For its moral, psychic and spiritual nature, it is indebted to a group of divine beings, the name and characteristics of which will be given in Volume 2. Collectively, men are the handiwork of hosts of various spirits, distributively, the tabernacles of those hosts, and occasionally and individually, the vehicles of some of them. In our present all-material 5th race, the earthly spirit of the 4th is still strong in us, but we are approaching the time when the pendulum of evolution will direct its swing decidedly upwards, bringing humanity back on a parallel line with the primitive 3rd root race in spirituality. During its childhood, mankind was wholly composed of that angelic host, who were the indwelling spirits that animated the monstrous and gigantic tabernacles of clay of the 4th race, built by and composed of countless myriads of lives, as our bodies are also now. This sentence will be explained later on in the present commentary. Science, dimly perceiving the truth, may find bacteria and other infinitesimals in the human body and see in them only occasional and abnormal visitors to which diseases are attributed. Occultism, which discerns a life in every atom and molecule, whether in a mineral or human body, in air, fire or water, affirms that our whole body is built of such lives, the smallest bacterium under the microscope being to them in comparative size like an elephant to the tiniest infusoria. The tabernacles mentioned above have improved in texture and symmetry of form, growing and developing with the globe that bears them, but the physical improvement has taken place at the expense of the spiritual inner man and of nature. The three middle principles, in earth and man, became with every race more material, the soul stepping back to make room for the physical intellect, the essence of the elements becoming the material and composite elements now known. Man is not, nor could he ever be, the complete product of the Lord God, but he is the child of the Elohim, so arbitrarily changed into the singular number and masculine gender. The first Dionys, commissioned to create man in their image, could only throw off their shadows as a delicate model for the nature spirits of matter to work upon. Man is, beyond any doubt, formed physically out of the dust of the earth, but his creators and fashioners were many. Nor can it be said that the Lord God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, unless that God is identified with the one life omnipresent though invisible, and unless the same operation is attributed to God on behalf of every living soul, which is the vital soul, nephesh, and not the divine spirit, ruach, which ensures to man alone a divine degree of immortality that no animal, as such, could ever attain in this cycle of incarnation. It is owing to the inadequate distinctions made by the Jews, and now by our Western metaphysicians, who are unable to understand, and hence to accept, more than a triune man spirit, soul, body, that the breath of life has been confused with the immortal spirit. This applies also directly to the Protestant theologians, who in translating a certain verse in the fourth Gospel, have entirely perverted its meaning. This mistranslation runs, "The wind bloweth where it listeth," instead of "the Spirit goeth where it willeth," as in the original, and also in the translation of the Greek Eastern Church. The learned and very philosophical author of New Aspects of Life would impress upon his reader that the Nefesh Chaya, living soul, according to the Hebrews, proceeded from, or was produced by, the infusion of the spirit or breath of life into the quickening body of man, and was to supersede and take the place of that spirit in the thus constituted self, so that the spirit passed into, was lost sight of, and disappeared in the living soul. The human body, he thinks, ought to be viewed as a matrix in which, and from which, the soul, which he seems to place higher than the spirit, is developed. Considered functionally and from the standpoint of activity, the soul stands undeniably higher in this finite and conditioned world of Maya. The soul, he says, is ultimately produced from the animated body of man. Thus the author identifies spirit, Atma, with the breath of life simply. The Eastern occultists will demur to this statement, for it is based on the erroneous conception that prana and Atma, or Jivatma, are one and the same thing. The author supports the argument by showing that with the ancient Hebrews, Greeks, and even Latins, ruach, pneuma and spiritus, meant wind with the Jews undeniably, and with the Greeks and Romans very probably, the Greek word anemos, wind, and the Latin animus, soul, having a suspicious relation. This is very far-fetched. But a legitimate battlefield for deciding this question is hardly to be found, since drive. Pratt seems to be a practical, matter-of-fact metaphysician, a kind of Kabbalist positivist, whereas the Eastern metaphysicians, especially the Vedantins, are all idealists. The occultists also are of the extreme esoteric Vedantin school, and though they call the one life, Parabrahman, the great breath and the whirlwind, they disconnect the seventh principle entirely from matter and deny that it has any relation to or connection with it. Thus the philosophy of man's psychic, spiritual and mental relations with his physical functions is in almost inextricable confusion. Neither the old Aryan nor the Egyptian psychology is now properly understood, nor can they be assimilated without accepting the esoteric septenary, or, at any rate, the Vedantic quinquepartite division of the human inner principles. Failing which, it will be forever impossible to understand the metaphysical and purely psychic, and even physiological, relations between the Dayan Chohans, or angels, on the one plane, and humanity on the other. No Eastern, Aryan, esoteric works are so far published, but we possess the Egyptian papyri, which speak clearly of the seven principles, or the seven souls of man. The Book of the Dead gives a complete list of the transformations that every defunct undergoes, while divesting himself, one by one, of all these principles materialized for the sake of clearness into ethereal entities or bodies. We must, moreover, remind those who try to show that the ancient Egyptians did not teach reincarnation, that the soul, the ego or self, of the defunct is said to be living in eternity. It is immortal, coeval with, and disappearing with, the solar boat that is, for the cycle of necessity. This soul emerges from the Jiao, the realm of the cause of life, and joins the living on earth by day, to return to Jiao every night. This expresses the periodical existences of the ego. The shadow, the astral form, is annihilated, devoured by the urious. The mains will be annihilated. The two twins, the fourth and fifth principles, will be scattered, but the soul bird, the divine swallow, and the urious of flame, manas and atma buddhi, will live in the eternity, for they are their mother's husbands. Another suggestive analogy between the Aryan, or Brahmanical, and the Egyptian esotericism. The former call the Pitras the lunar ancestors of men, and the Egyptians make of the moon god, Tot Esman, the first human ancestor. This moon god expressed the seven nature powers that were prior to himself, and were summed up in him as his seven souls, of which he was the manifestor as the eighth one. Hence the eighth sphere. The seven rays of the Chaldean Heptachus or Yao on the Gnostic stones indicate the same septenary of souls. The first form of the mystical seven was seen to be figured in heaven by the seven large stars of the Great Bear, the constellation assigned by the Egyptians to the Mother of Time, and of the seven elemental powers. As well known to every Hindu, this same constellation represents in India the seven rishis, and is called Riksha and Chitrashikandinas. Like alone produces like. The earth gives man his body, the gods, Dionys, give him his five inner principles, the psychic shadow, of which these gods are often the animating principle. Spirit, Atman, is one, and indiscrete. It is not in the Jiao. For what is the Jiao? The frequent allusion to it in the Book of the Dead contains a mystery. Jiao is the path of the night sun, the inferior hemisphere, or the infernal region of the Egyptians, placed by them on the concealed side of the moon. The human being, in their esotericism, came out from the moon a triple mystery, astronomical, physiological and psychical. At once, he crossed the whole cycle of existence and then returned to his birthplace before issuing from it again. Thus the defunct is shown arriving in the west, receiving his judgment before Osiris, resurrecting as the god Horus, and circling round the sidereal heavens, which is an allegorical assimilation to Ra, the sun, then having crossed the Nut, the celestial abyss, returning once more to Jiao, an assimilation to Osiris, who, as the god of life and reproduction, inhabits the moon. Plutarch shows the Egyptians celebrating a festival called the Ingress of Osiris into the moon. In the ritual, life is promised after death, and the renovation of life is placed under the patronage of Osiris Lunas, because the moon was the symbol of life renewals or reincarnations, owing to its growth, waning, dying, and reappearance every month. In the Dankmo, it is said, "O Osiris Lunas, that renews to thee thy renewal." And Sabak says to CD1, "Thou renewest thyself as the god Lunas, when a babe." It is still better explained in Aloof Papyrus. Couplings and conceptions abound when he Osiris Lunas is seen in heaven on that day. Says Osiris, "O sole radiant beam of the moon, I issue from the circulating multitudes of stars. Open me the Jiao, for Osiris and I will issue by day to do what I have to do amongst the living to produce conceptions." Osiris was God manifest in generation because the ancients knew, far better than the moderns, the real occult influences of the lunar body upon the mysteries of conception. In the oldest systems we find the moon always male. Thus Soma, with the Hindus, is a kind of sidereal Don Juan, a king and the father, albeit illegitimate, of Buddha wisdom. This relates to occult knowledge, a wisdom gathered through a thorough acquaintance with lunar mysteries, including those of sexual generation. And later, when the moon became connected with the female goddesses, with Diana, Isis, Artemis, Juno, etc. This connection was also due to a thorough knowledge of physiology and female nature, physical as much as psychic. If, instead of being taught in Sunday schools useless lessons from the Bible, the armies of the ragged and poor were taught astrology so far, at any rate, as the occult properties of the moon and its hidden influences on generation are concerned, then there would be little need to fear increase of the population, or to resort to the questionable literature of the Malthusians for its arrest. For it is the moon and her conjunctions that regulate conceptions, and every astrologer in India knows it. During the previous races, and at least at the beginning of the present one, those who indulged in marital relations during certain lunar phases that made those relations sterile were regarded as sorcerers and sinners. But now even these sins of old, which arose from the abuse of occult knowledge, would appear preferable to the crimes of today, which are perpetrated because of the complete ignorance of such occult influences. But, primarily, the sun and moon were the only visible and, by their effects, so to say, tangible, psychic and physiological deities, the Father and the Son, while space or air in general, or that expanse of heaven called Nut by the Egyptians, was the concealed spirit or breath of the two. The Father and Son were interchangeable in their functions and worked together harmoniously in their effects upon terrestrial nature and humanity, hence they were regarded as one, though two as personified entities. They were both males, and both had their distinct though collaborative work in the causative generation of humanity. So much from the astronomical and cosmic standpoints, viewed and expressed in symbolical language, which became in our last races theological and dogmatic. But behind this veil of cosmic and astrological symbols, there were the occult mysteries of anthropography and the primeval genesis of man. And in this, no knowledge of symbols, or even the key to the post-Diluvian symbolical language of the Jews, will or can help, save only with reference to that which has been laid down in national scriptures for exoteric uses, the sum of which, however cleverly veiled, was but the smallest portion of the real primitive history of each people, and often, moreover, as in the Hebrew scriptures, related merely to the terrestrial human, and not to the divine life of that nation. That psychic and spiritual element belonged to the mysteries and initiation. There were things never recorded in scrolls, but which, as in Central Asia, were engraved on rocks and in subterranean crypts. Nevertheless, there was a time when the whole world was of one lip, and of one knowledge, and man knew more of his origin than he does now, and thus knew that the sun and moon, however large a part they may play in the constitution, growth and development of the human body, were not the direct causative agents of his appearance on earth, for these agents, in truth, are the living and intelligent powers which the occultists call Dayan Chohans. As to this, a very learned admirer of the Jewish esotericism tells us that the Kabbalah says expressly that Elohim is a general abstraction, what we call in mathematics a constant coefficient or a general function entering into all construction, not particular, that is, by the general ratio 1 to 31,415, the astrodianic and Elohistic figures. To this the Eastern occultist replies, "Quite so. They are an abstraction to our physical senses. To our spiritual perceptions, however, and to our inner spiritual eye, the Elohim, or Dionys, are no more an abstraction than our soul and spirit are to us. Reject the one and you reject the other, since that which is the surviving entity in us is partly the direct emanation from, and partly those celestial entities themselves. One thing is certain, the Jews were perfectly acquainted with sorcery and various maleficent forces. But, with the exception of some of their great prophets and seers like Daniel and Ezekiel Enoch, belonging to a far distant race, as a generic character, and not to any nation, but to all they knew little of, nor would they deal with. The real divine occultism, their national character being averse to anything which had no direct bearing upon their own ethnical, tribal and individual benefits, witnessed their own prophets, and the curses thundered by them against the stiff-necked race. But even the Kabbalah plainly shows the direct relation between the Sephiroth, or Elohim, and men. Therefore, when it is proved to us that the Kabbalistic identification of Jehovah with Binah, a female Sephira, has still another, a sub-occult, meaning in it, then and then only will occultists be ready to pass the palm of perfection to the Kabbalist. Until then, it is asserted that, as Jehovah, in the abstract sense of a one living God, is a single number, a metaphysical figment, and a reality only when put in his proper place as an emanation and a sephira, we have a right to maintain that the Zohar, as witnessed by the Book of Numbers, at any rate, gave out originally, before the Christian Kabbalists had disfigured it, and still gives out, the same doctrine that we do. That is, it makes man emanate, not from one celestial man, but from a septenary group of celestial men, or angels, just as in Pymander, the thought divine. 3. When the one becomes two, the threefold appears, a. The three are one, and it is our thread, Olanu, the heart of the man plant, called Saptaparna. B. A. When the one becomes two, the threefold appears. To wit, when the one eternal drops its reflection into the region of manifestation, that reflection, the ray, differentiates the water of space, or, in the words of the Book of the Dead, chaos ceases through the effulgence of the ray of primordial light, dissipating total darkness by the help of the great magic power of the word of the central sun. Chaos becomes male-female, and water, incubated by light, and the threefold being issues as its firstborn. Ra or Osiris Ptah creates his own limbs like Brahma, by creating the gods destined to personify his phases during the cycle. The Egyptian Ra, issuing from the deep, is the divine universal soul in its manifested aspect, and so is Narayana, the Purusha, concealed in Akasha and present in ether. This is the metaphysical explanation and refers to the very beginning of evolution, or, as we would rather say, of theogony. The meaning of the stanza, when explained from another standpoint in its reference to the mystery of man and his origin, is still more difficult to comprehend. In order to form a clear conception of what is meant by the one becoming two, and then being transformed into the threefold, the student has to make himself thoroughly acquainted with what we call rounds. If he refers to esoteric Buddhism, the first attempt to sketch out an approximate outline of archaic cosmogony, he will find that by a round is meant the serial evolution of nascent material nature of the 7 globes of our chain. With their mineral, vegetable and animal kingdoms, man being included in the latter and standing at the head of it during the whole period of a life cycle, which latter would be called by the Brahmins a day of Brahma. It is, in short, one revolution of the wheel, our planetary chain, which is composed of 7 globes, or 7 separate wheels in another sense this time. When evolution has run downward into matter from globe A to globe G, it is one round. In the middle of the 4th revolution, which is our present round, evolution has reached its acme of physical development, crowned its work with the perfect physical man, and, from this point, begins its work spirit ward. All this needs little repetition, as it is well explained in esoteric Buddhism. That which was hardly touched upon, however, and of which the little that was said has misled many, is the origin of man, and it is upon this that a little more light may now be thrown, just enough to make the stanza more comprehensible, as the process will be fully explained only in its legitimate place, in Volume 2. Now every round, on the descending scale, is but a repetition in a more concrete form of the round which preceded it, just as every globe, down to our 4th sphere, the actual Earth, is a grosser and more material copy of the more shadowy sphere which precedes it, each in order, on the 3 higher planes. On its way upwards, on the ascending arc, evolution spiritualizes and etherealizes, so to speak, the general nature of all, bringing it onto a level with the plane on which the twin globe on the opposite arc is placed, the result being that when the 7th globe is reached, in whatever round, the nature of everything that is evolving returns to the condition it was in at its starting point, plus, every time, a new and superior degree in the states of consciousness. Thus it becomes clear that the origin of man, so-called, in this our present round, or life cycle, on this planet, must occupy the same place in the same order save details based on local conditions and time as in the preceding round. Again, it must be explained and remembered that, as the work of each round is said to be apportioned to a different group of so-called creators or architects, so is that of every globe. That is, it is under the supervision and guidance of special builders and watchers, the various Dayan Chohans. Creators is an incorrect word to use, as no other religion, not even the sect of the Vasishtadvaitas in India, one which anthropomorphizes even Parabrahman, believes in creation ex nihilo, as Christians and Jews do, but only in evolution out of pre-existing materials. The group of the hierarchy which is commissioned to create men is a special group, then, yet it evolved shadowy man in this cycle, just as a higher and still more spiritual group evolved him in the third round. But as it is the sixth, on the downward scale of spirituality, the last and seventh being the terrestrial spirits, elementals, which gradually form, build and condense his physical body, this sixth group evolves no more than the future man's shadowy form, a filmy, hardly visible, transparent copy of themselves. It becomes the task of the fifth hierarchy, the mysterious beings that preside over the constellation Capricornus, Makara, or crocodile in India, and in Egypt, to inform the empty and ethereal animal form and make of it the rational man. This is one of those subjects upon which very little may be said to the general public. It is a mystery truly, but only to him who is prepared to reject the existence of intellectual and conscious spiritual beings in the universe, and to limit full consciousness to man alone, and that only as a function of the brain. Many are those among the spiritual entities who have incarnated bodily in man since his first appearance, and who, for all that, still exist as independently as they did before, in the infinitudes of space. To put it more clearly, such an invisible entity may be bodily present on Earth without, however, abandoning its status and functions in the supersensuous regions. If this needs explanation, we can do no better than remind the reader of like cases in so-called spiritualism, though such cases are very rare, at least as regards the nature of the entity incarnating or taking temporary possession of a medium. For the so-called spirits that may occasionally possess themselves of the bodies of mediums are not the monads or higher principles of disembodied personalities. Such spirits can only be either elementaries or nirmanakayas. Just as certain persons, whether by virtue of a peculiar organization or through the power of acquired mystic knowledge, can be seen in their double in one place, while their body is many miles away, so the same thing can occur in the case of superior beings. Man, philosophically considered, is, in his outward form, simply an animal, hardly more perfect than his pithecoid-like ancestor of the third round. He is a living body, not a living being, since the realization of existence, the ego sum, necessitates self-consciousness, and an animal can only have direct consciousness, or instinct. This was so well understood by the ancients that even the Kabbalists made of soul and body two lives, independent of each other. In the New Aspects of Life, the author states the Kabbalistic teaching. They held that functionally, spirit and matter, of corresponding opacity and density, tended to coalesce, and that the resultant created spirits, in the disembodied state, were constituted on a scale in which the differing opacities and transparencies of elemental or uncreated spirit were reproduced, and that these spirits, in the disembodied state, attracted, appropriated, digested and assimilated elemental spirit and elemental matter, whose condition was conformed to their own. They therefore taught that there was a wide difference in the conditions of created spirits, and that, in the intimate association between the spirit world and the world of matter, the more opaque spirits, in the disembodied state, were drawn towards the more dense parts of the material world and therefore tended towards the center of the earth, where they found the conditions most suited to their state, while the more transparent spirits passed into the surrounding aura of the planet, the most rarefied finding their home in its satellite. This relates exclusively to our elemental spirits and has naught to do with either the planetary, sidereal, cosmic or interetheric intelligent forces, or angels as they are termed by the Roman Church. The Jewish Kabbalists, especially the practical occultists who dealt with ceremonial magic, busied themselves solely with the spirits of the planets and the elementals so-called. Therefore the above covers only a portion of the esoteric teaching. The soul, whose body vehicle is the astral, ethereosubstantial envelope, could die and man be still living on earth. That is to say, the soul could free itself from and quit the tabernacle for various reasons, such as insanity, spiritual and physical depravity, etc. The possibility of the soul, that is, the eternal spiritual ego dwelling in the unseen worlds, while its body goes on living on earth, is a preeminently occult doctrine, especially in Chinese and Buddhist philosophy. Many are the soulless men among us, for the occurrences found to take place in wicked materialists, as well as in persons who advance in holiness and never turn back. Therefore, that which living men, initiates, can do, the Dhyanis, who have no physical body to hamper them, can do still better. This was the belief of the antediluvians, and it is fast becoming that of modern intellectual society and spiritualism, as well as in the Greek and Roman churches, which teach the ubiquity of their angels. The Zoroastrians regarded their Amshaspans as dual entities, Faruers, applying this duality in esoteric philosophy, at any rate to all the spiritual and invisible denizens of the numberless worlds in space, which are visible to our eye. In the note of Damascus, 6th century, on the Chaldean oracles, we have ample evidence of the universality of this doctrine, for he says, in these oracles, the 7 cosmocrators of the world pillars, mentioned likewise by St. Paul, are double, one set being commissioned to rule the superior worlds, the spiritual and the sidereal, and the other to guide and watch over the worlds of matter. Such is also the opinion of Jamblichus, who makes an evident distinction between the archangels and the archons. The above may be applied, of course, to the distinction made between the degrees or orders of spiritual beings, and it is in this sense that the Roman Catholic Church tries to interpret and teach the difference, for while the archangels are in her teaching divine and holy, she denounces their doubles as devils. But the word Faruer is not to be understood in this sense, for it means simply the reverse or the opposite side of some attribute or quality. Thus, when the occultist says that the demon is the inverse of God evil, the reverse of the metal he does not mean 2 separate actualities, but 2 aspects or facets of the same unity. But the best man living, side by side with an archangel as described in theology, would appear a fiend. Hence a certain reason in depreciating a lower double immersed far deeper in matter than its original. But still there is as little cause to regard them as devils, and this is precisely what the Roman Catholics maintain against all reason and logic. This identity between the spirit and its material double in man, it is the reverse, explains still better the confusion already alluded to in this work, in the names and individualities, as well as in the numbers, of the Rishis and Prajapatis, especially of those of the Satya Yuga and the Mahabharatan period. It also throws additional light on what the secret doctrine teaches with regard to the root and the seed manus. Not only these progenitors of our mankind, but every human being, we are taught, has his prototype in the spiritual spheres, which prototype is the highest essence of his seventh principle. Thus the seven manus become 14, the root manu being the prime cause, and the seed manu its effect, and from the Satya Yuga, the first stage, to the heroic period, these manus or rishis become 21 in number. B. The concluding sentence of this shloka shows how archaic is the belief and the doctrine that man is sevenfold in his constitution. The thread of being, which animates man, and passes through all his personalities, or rebirths on this earth, an allusion to Sutratma, the thread on which moreover all his spirits are strung, is spun from the essence of the threefold, the fourfold and the fivefold, which contain all the preceding. Panchashika, agreeably to Padma Purana, is one of the seven Kumaras who go to Shvetadvipa to worship Vishnu. We shall see, further on, what connection there is between the celibate and chaste sons of Brahma, who refuse to multiply, and terrestrial mortals. Meanwhile, it is evident that the man plant, Saptaparna, thus refers to the seven principles, and that man is compared to the seven-leaved plant, which is so sacred among Buddhists. The Egyptian allegory, in the Book of the Dead, that relates to the reward of the soul, is as suggestive of our septenary doctrine as it is poetical. The deceased is allotted a piece of land in the field of Anru, wherein the manes, the deified shades of the dead, glean, as the harvest they have sown by their actions in life, the corn 7 cubits high, which grows in a territory divided into 7 and 14 portions. This corn is the food on which they will live and prosper, or that will kill them, in Amenti, the realm of which the Anru field is a domain. For, as said in the hymn, the deceased is either destroyed therein, or becomes pure spirit for the eternity, in consequence of the 7 times 77 lives past, or to be passed, on earth. The idea of the corn reaped as the fruit of our actions is very graphic. 4. It is the root that never dies, the three-tongued flame of the 4 wicks, the wicks or the sparks, that draw from the three-tongued flame, shot out by the 7, their flame, the beams and sparks of one moon, reflected in the running waves of all the rivers of the earth. B. The three-tongued flame that never dies is the immortal spiritual triad, the Atma, Buddhi and Manas, or rather the fruitage of the last, assimilated by the first 2 after every terrestrial life. The 4 wicks that go out and are extinguished are the quaternary, the 4 lower principles, including the body. I am the 3-wicked flame, and my wicks are immortal, says the defunct. I enter into the domain of Sekhem the god, whose hand sows the seed of action produced by the disembodied soul, and I enter the region of the flames who have destroyed their adversaries, i.e., got rid of the sin-creating 4 wicks. The three-tongued flame of the 4 wicks corresponds to the 4 unities and the 3 binaries of the Sephirethal tree. B. Just as milliards of bright sparks dance on the waters of an ocean, above which one and the same moon is shining, so are evanescent personalities the illusive envelopes of the immortal monad ego twinkle and dance on the waves of Maya. They appear and, as the thousands of sparks produced by the moonbeams, last only so long as the queen of the night radiates her luster on the running waves of life, the period of a Manvantara, and then they disappear, the beam symbols of our eternal spiritual egos alone surviving, remerged in, and being, as they were before, one with the mother source. 5. The spark hangs from the flame by the finest thread of Fohit. It journeys through the 7 worlds of Maya, A. It stops in the first, and is a metal and a stone. It passes into the second, and behold a plant. The plant whirls through 7 forms and becomes a sacred animal, B. From the combined attributes of these, Manu, the thinker, is formed. Who forms him? The 7 lives, and the 1 life, C. Who completes him? The 5-fold LHA. And who perfects the last body? Fish, Sin and Soma, D. A. The phrase, through the 7 worlds of Maya, refers here to the 7 globes of the planetary chain and the 7 rounds, or the 49 stations of active existence, that are before the spark or monad, at the beginning of every great life cycle, Manvantara. The thread of Fohit is the thread of life before referred to. This relates to the greatest problem of philosophy, the physical and substantial nature of life, the independent nature of which is denied by modern science, because that science is unable to comprehend it. The reincarnationists and believers in karma alone dimly perceive that the whole secret of life is in the unbroken series of its manifestations, whether in, or apart from, the physical body. Because even if life, like a dome of many-colored glass, stains the white radiance of eternity, yet it is itself part and parcel of that eternity, for life alone can understand life. What is that spark which hangs from the flame? It is Jiva, the monad in conjunction with manas, or rather its aroma, that which remains from each personality, when worthy, and hangs from Atma Buddhi, the flame, by the thread of life. In whatever way it is interpreted, and into whatever number of principles the human being is divided, it may be easily shown that this doctrine is supported by all the ancient religions, from the Vedic to the Egyptian, from the Zoroastrian to the Jewish. In the case of the last mentioned, the Kabbalistic works offer abundant proof of this statement. The entire system of the Kabbalistic numerals is based on the divine septenary hanging from the triad, thus forming the decade, and its permutations 7, 5, 4, and 3, which, finally, all merge into the one itself, an endless and boundless circle. As says the Zohar, the deity, the ever-invisible presence, manifests itself through the 10 Sephiroth, which are its radiating witnesses. The deity is like the sea from which outflows a stream called wisdom, the waters of which fall into a lake named intelligence. From the basin, like 7 channels, issue the 7 Sephiroth. For 10 equals 7. The decade contains 4 unities and 3 binaries. The 10 Sephiroth correspond to the limbs of man. When I, the Elohim, framed Adam Kadmon, the spirit of the Eternal shot out of his body, like a sheet of lightning that radiated at once on the billows of the 7 millions of skies, and my 10 splendors were his limbs. But neither the head nor the shoulders of Adam Kadmon can be seen. Therefore we read in the Sifrad Sinyaltha, the book of the concealed mystery. In the beginning of time, after the Elohim, the sons of light and life, or the builders, had shaped out of the eternal essence the heavens and the earth, they formed the world 6 by 6. The 7th being Malkuth, which is our earth on its plane, and the lowest on all the other planes of conscious existence. The Chaldean Book of Numbers contains a detailed explanation of all this. The first triad of the body of Adam Kadmon, the 3 upper planes of the 7, cannot be seen before the soul stands in the presence of the Ancient of Days. The Sephiroth of this upper triad are 1. Kether, the crown, represented by the brow of Macroprosopus. 2. Chakma, wisdom, a male principle, by his right shoulder, and 3. Bina, intelligence, a female principle, by the left shoulder. Then come the 7 limbs, or Sephiroth, on the planes of manifestation, the totality of these 4 planes being represented by microprosopis, the lesser face, or tetragrammaton, the 4-lettered mystery. The 7 manifested and the 3 concealed limbs are the body of the deity. Thus our earth, Malkuth, is both the 7th and the 4th world, the former when counting from the first globe above, the latter if reckoned by the planes. It is generated by the 6th globe or Sephira, called Yesod, foundation, or, as said in the Book of Numbers, by Yesod, he Adam Kadmon fecundates the primitive Heva Ever our earth. Rendered in mystic language, this is the explanation why Malkuth, called the inferior mother, Matrona, queen, and the kingdom of the foundation, is shown as the bride of Tetragrammaton, or Microprosopis, the second Logos, the heavenly man. When free from all impurity, she will become united with the spiritual Logos, i.e., in the 7th race of the 7th round after the regeneration, on the day of Sabbath. For the 7th day again has an occult significance undreamed of by our theologians. When Matronitha, the mother, is separated and brought face to face with the king, in the excellence of the Sabbath, all things become one body. Become one body means that all is reabsorbed once more into the one element, the spirits of men becoming nervinous, and the elements of everything else becoming again what they were before or undifferentiated substance. Sabbath means rest, or nirvana. It is not the 7th day after 6 days, but a period the duration of which equals that of the 7 days or any period made up of 7 parts. Thus a pralaya is equal in duration to a manvantara, or a night of Brahma is equal to his day. If the Christians will follow Jewish customs, they ought to adopt the spirit and not the dead letter thereof. They should work 1 week of 7 days and rest 7 days. That the word Sabbath had a mystic significance is disclosed in the contempt shown by Jesus for the Sabbath day, and by what is said in Luke. Sabbath is there taken for the whole week. See the Greek text where the week is called Sabbath. Literally, I fast twice in the Sabbath. Paul, an initiate, knew it well when referring to the eternal rest and felicity in heaven as Sabbath. And their happiness will be eternal, for they will ever be one with the Lord, and will enjoy an eternal Sabbath. The difference between the Kabbalah and the archaic esoteric video taking the Kabbalah as contained in the Chaldean Book of Numbers, not as misrepresented by its now disfigured copy. The Kabbalah of the Christian mystics is very small indeed, being confined to unimportant divergences of form and expression. Thus Eastern occultism refers to our earth as the 4th world, the lowest of the chain, above which run upward on both curves the 6 globes, 3 on each side. The Zohar, on the other hand, calls the earth the lower, or the 7th, adding that upon the 6th depend all things which are in it, microprosopis. The smaller face smaller because manifested and finite is formed of 6 Sephiroth says the same work. 7 kings come and die in the thrice destroyed world Malkuth, our earth, destroyed after each of the 3 rounds which it has gone through. And their reign that of the 7 kings will be broken up. This relates to the 7 races, 5 of which have already appeared, and 2 more have still to appear in this round. The Shinto allegorical accounts of cosmogony and the origin of man, in Japan, hint at the same belief. Captain C. Founds, who studied the religion underlying the various sects of the land, for nearly 9 years in the monasteries of Japan, says. The Shinto idea of creation is as follows. Out of chaos, Kanton, the earth, in, was the sediment precipitated, and the heavens, yo, the ethereal essences which ascended. Man, Jin, appeared between the two. The first man was called Kuni Takota Chino Mikoto, and 5 other names were given to him, and then the human race appeared, male and female. Izanagi and Izanami begat Tenshoko Doijin, the first of the 5 gods of the earth. These gods are simply our 5 races, Izanagi and Izanami, being the 2 kinds of ancestors, the 2 preceding races which give birth to animal and to rational man. It will be shown in Volume 2 that the number 7, as well as the doctrine of the septenary constitution of man, was preeminent in all the secret systems. It plays as important a part in Western Kabbalah as in Eastern occultism. Eliphas Levi calls the number 7 the key to the Mosaic creation and the symbols of every religion. He shows the Kabbalah faithfully following even the septenary division of man, for the diagram he gives in his Clef des Grands Mystères is septenary. This may be seen at a glance, however cleverly the correct thought is veiled. One needs also only to look at the diagram, the formation of the soul in Mather's Kabbalah Unveiled, from the above-mentioned work of Levi, to find the same, though with a different interpretation. Thus it stands with both the Kabbalistic and occult names attached. Levi calls Nephesh that which we name manas, and vice versa. Nephesh is the breath of animal life and man the breath of life, instinctual in the animal, and manas is the third soul, the human in its light side, and animal in its connection with Samal or Kama. Nephesh is really the breath of animal life breathed into Adam, the man of dust. It is consequently the vital spark, the informing element. Without manas, the reasoning solar mind, which in Levi's diagram is miscalled nephesh, Atma buddhi is irrational on this plane and cannot act. It is buddhi which is the plastic mediator, not manas, the intelligent medium between the upper triad and the lower quaternary. But there are many such strange and curious transformations to be found in the Kabbalistic works, a convincing proof that this literature has become a sad jumble. We do not accept the classification, except in this one particular, in order to show the points of agreement. We will now give in tabular form what the very cautious Eliphas Levi says in explanation of his diagram, and what the esoteric doctrine teaches, and compare the two. Levi, too, makes a distinction between Kabbalistic and occult pneumatics. Such are the distorted copies of the esoteric doctrine in the Kabbalah. But to return to Shloka 5 of stanza Vi. B. The well-known Kabbalistic aphorism runs: a stone becomes a plant, a beast, the beast, a man, a spirit, and the spirit, a god. The spark animates all the kingdoms, in turn, before it enters into and informs divine man, between whom and his predecessor animal man, there is all the difference in the world. Genesis begins its anthropology at the wrong end, evidently for a blind and lands nowhere. The introductory chapters of Genesis were never meant to represent even a remote allegory of the creation of our earth. They embrace a metaphysical conception of some indefinite period, in eternity, when successive attempts were being made by the law of evolution at the formation of universes. The idea is plainly stated in the Zohar. There were old worlds, which perished as soon as they came into existence, were formless, and were called sparks. Thus, the smith, when hammering the iron, lets the sparks fly in all directions. The sparks are the primordial worlds, which could not continue because the sacred aged Sephira had not as yet assumed its form of androgyne or opposite sexes of king and queen, Sephira and Cadman, and the master was not yet at his work. Had Genesis begun as it ought, one would have found in it, first, the celestial logos, the heavenly man which evolves as a compound unit of logoi, out of which, after their prolaic sleep a sleep that gathers the numbers scattered on the Mayavic plane into one, as the separate globules of quicksilver on a plate blend into one mass the logoi appear in their totality, as the first male and female or atom Cadman. The fiat lux of the Bible, as we have already seen. But this transformation did not take place on our earth, nor on any material plane, but in the spatial depths of the first differentiation of the eternal root matter. On our nascent globe, things proceed differently. The monitor Jiva, as Set and Isis unveiled, is, first of all, shot down by the law of evolution into the lowest form of matter, the mineral. After a sevenfold gyration encased in the stone, or that which will become mineral and stone in the fourth round, it creeps out of it, say, as a lichen. Passing thence, through all the forms of vegetable matter, into what is termed animal matter, it has now reached the point at which it has become the germ, so to speak, of the animal that will become the physical man. All this, up to the third round, is formless as matter and senseless as consciousness. For the monad, or jiva, per se, cannot be called even spirit. It is a ray, a breath of the absolute, or the absoluteness rather, and the absolute homogeneity, having no relations with the conditioned and relative finiteness, is unconscious on our plane. Therefore, besides the material which will be needed for its future human form, the monad requires a spiritual model, or prototype, for that material to shape itself into, and b. an intelligent consciousness to guide its evolution and progress, neither of which is possessed by the homogeneous monad, or by senseless though living matter. The atom of dust requires the soul of life to be breathed into him. The two middle principles, which are the sentient life of the irrational animal and the human soul, for the former is irrational without the latter. It is only when, from a potential androgyne, man has become separated into male and female, that he will be endowed with this conscious, rational, individual soul, manas, the principle, or the intelligence, of the Elohim, to receive which, he has to eat of the fruit of knowledge from the tree of good and evil. How is he to obtain all this? The occult doctrine teaches that while the monad is cycling on downward into matter, these very Elohim, or Pitras, the lower Dayan Chohans, are evolving, pari passu with it, on a higher and more spiritual plane, descending also relatively into matter, on their own plane of consciousness, when, after having reached a certain point, they will meet the incarnating senseless monad, encased in the lowest matter. And blending the two potencies, spirit and matter, the union will produce that terrestrial symbol of the heavenly man and space-perfect man. In the Sankhya philosophy, Purusha, spirit, is spoken of as something impotent, unless it mounts on the shoulders of Prakriti, matter, which, left alone, is senseless. But in the secret philosophy they are viewed as graduated. Spirit and matter, though one and the same thing in their origin, when once they are on the plane of differentiation, begin each of them their evolutionary progress in contrary directions, spirit falling gradually into matter, and the latter ascending to its original condition, that of a pure spiritual substance. Both are inseparable, yet ever separated. On the physical plane, two like poles will always repel each other. While the negative and the positive are mutually attracted, so do spirit and matter stand to each other, the two poles of the same homogeneous substance, the root principle of the universe. Therefore, when the hour strikes for Purusha to mount on Prakriti's shoulders for the formation of the perfect man, rudimentary man of the first 2.5 races being only the first, gradually evolving into the most perfect of mammals, the celestial ancestors, entities from preceding worlds, called in India the Shishta, step in on this our plane and incarnate in the physical or animal man, as the Pitras had stepped in before them for the formation of the latter. Thus the two processes for the two creations, the animal and the divine man, differ greatly. The Pitras shoot out from their ethereal bodies still more ethereal and shadowy similitudes of themselves, or what we should now call doubles or astral forms in their own likeness. This furnishes the monad with its first dwelling, and blind matter with a model around and upon which to build henceforth. But man is still incomplete. From Svayambhuva Manu, from whom descended the 7 primitive Manus or Prajapatis, each of whom gave birth to a primitive race of men, down to the Codex Nazarius, in which Karabtanos or fetihal, blind concupiscent matter, begets on his mother, Spiritus, 7 figures, each of which stands as the progenitor of one of the primeval 7 races. This doctrine has left its impress on every archaic scripture. Who forms Manu the man, and who forms his body? The life and the lives. Sin and the moon. Here Manu stands for the spiritual, heavenly man, the real and non-dying ego in us, which is the direct emanation of the one life or the absolute deity. As to our outward physical bodies, the house of the tabernacle of the soul, the doctrine teaches a strange lesson, so strange that unless thoroughly explained, and as thoroughly comprehended, it is only the exact science of the future that is destined to fully vindicate the theory. It has been stated before now that occultism does not accept anything inorganic in the cosmos. The expression employed by science, inorganic substance, means simply that the latent life, slumbering in the molecules of so-called inert matter, is incognizable. All is life, and every atom of even mineral dust is a life, though beyond our comprehension and perception, because it is outside the range of the laws known to those who reject occultism. The very atoms, says Tyndall, seem instinct with a desire for life. Whence, then, we would ask, comes the tendency to run into organic form? Is it in any way explicable, except according to the teachings of occult science? The worlds, to the profane, are built up of the known elements. To the conception of an Arat, these elements are themselves, collectively, a divine life, distributively, on the plane of manifestations, the numberless and countless crores of lives. Fire alone is one, on the plane of the one reality. On that of manifested, hence illusive, being, its particles are fiery lives which live and have their being at the expense of every other life that they consume. Therefore they are named the devourers. Every visible thing in this universe was built by such lives, from conscious and divine primordial man down to the unconscious agents that construct matter. From the one life, formless and uncreate, proceeds the universe of lives. First was manifested from the deep chaos cold luminous fire gaseous light, which formed the curds in space irresolvable nebulae, perhaps. These forut, and a great heat was developed by the encountering and collision, which produced rotation. Then came the first manifested material fire, The hot flames, the wanderers in heaven comets. Heat generates moist vapor that forms solid water, then dry mist, then liquid mist, watery, that puts out the luminous brightness of the pilgrim's comets and forms solid watery wheels matter globes. Bhumi, the earth, appears with 6 sisters. These produce by their continuous motion the inferior fire, heat, and an aqueous mist, which yields the third world element water, and from the breath of all atmospheric air is born. These 4 are the 4 lives of the first 4 periods rounds of Manvantara. The 3 last will follow. The commentary first speaks of the numberless and countless crores of lives. Is Pasteur, then, unconsciously taking the first step toward occult science in declaring that, if he dared express his ideas fully upon this subject, he would say that the organic cells are endowed with a vital potency that does not cease its activity with the cessation of a current of oxygen towards them, and does not, on that account, break off its relations with life itself, which is supported by the influence of that gas. I would add, continues Pasteur, that the evolution of the germ is accomplished by means of complicated phenomena, among which we must class processes of fermentation, and life, according to Claude Bernard and Pasteur, is nothing else than a process of fermentation. That there exist in nature beings, or lives, that can live and thrive without air, even on our globe, has been demonstrated by the same scientists. Pasteur found that many of the lower lives, such as vibrions and other microbes and bacteria, could exist without air, which, on the contrary, killed them. They derived the oxygen necessary for their multiplication from the various substances that surrounded them. He calls them Arabs, living on the tissues of our matter, when the latter has ceased to form a part of an integral and living whole, then called very unscientifically by science dead matter, and anaerobes. The one kind binds oxygen and contributes greatly to the destruction of animal life and vegetable tissues, furnishing to the atmosphere materials which enter, later on, into the constitution of other organisms. The other finally destroys, or rather annihilates, the so-called organic substance, ultimate decay being impossible without their participation. Certain germ cells, such as those of yeast, develop and multiply in air, but when deprived of it, they will adapt themselves to life without air and become ferments, absorbing oxygen from substances coming in contact with them, and thereby ruining the latter. The cells in fruit, when lacking free oxygen, act as ferments and stimulate fermentation. Therefore, the vegetable cell, in this case, manifests its life as an anaerobic being. Why, then, should an organic cell form, in this case, an exception? Asks Professor Bagalyubov. Pasteur shows that in the substance of our tissues and organs, the cell, not finding sufficient oxygen for itself, stimulates fermentation in the same way as the fruit cell, and Claude Bernard thought that Pasteur's idea of the formation of ferments found its application and corroboration in the fact that urea increases in the blood during strangulation. Life, therefore, is everywhere in the universe, and, occultism teaches us, it is also in the atom. Bhumi appears with 6 sisters, says the commentary. It is a Vedic teaching that there are 3 earths, corresponding to 3 heavens, and our earth, the 4th, is called Bhumi. This is the explanation given by our exoteric Western Orientalists. But the esoteric meaning, an allusion to it in the Vedas, is that it refers to our planetary chain, 3 earths on the descending arc, and 3 heavens, which are 3 earths or globes also, only far more ethereal, on the ascending or spiritual arc. By the first three we descend into matter, by the other three we ascend into spirit, the lowest one, Bhumi, our earth, forming the turning point, so to say, and containing, potentially, as much of spirit as it does of matter. But we shall treat of this hereafter. The general teaching of the commentary, then, is that every new round develops one of the compound elements, as now known to science, which rejects the primitive nomenclature, preferring to subdivide them into constituents. If nature is the ever-becoming on the manifested plane, then these elements are to be regarded in the same light. They have to evolve, progress, and increase to the manvanteric end. Thus the first round, we are taught, developed but one element, and a nature and humanity, in what may be spoken of as one aspect of nature called by some, very unscientifically, though it may be so de facto, one-dimensional space. The second round brought forth and developed two elements, fire and earth, and its humanity, adapted to this condition of nature, if we can give the name humanity to beings living under conditions now unknown to men, was, to use again a familiar phrase in a strictly figurative sense, the only way in which it can be used correctly a two-dimensional species. The processes of natural development which we are now considering will at once elucidate and discredit the fashion of speculating on the attributes of 2, 3, and 4 or more dimensional space, but, in passing, it is worthwhile to point out the real significance of the sound, but incomplete, intuition that is prompted among spiritualists and theosophists, and several great men of science. For the matter of that, the use of the modern expression, the fourth dimension of space. To begin with, the superficial absurdity of assuming that space itself is measurable in any direction is of little consequence. The familiar phrase can only be an abbreviation of the fuller form, the fourth dimension of matter, in space. But even thus expanded, it is an unhappy phrase, because while it is perfectly true that the progress of evolution may be destined to introduce us to new characteristics of matter, those with which we are already familiar are really more numerous than the three dimensions. The qualities, or what is perhaps the best available term, the characteristics of matter, must clearly bear a direct relation always to the senses of man. Matter has extension, color, motion, molecular motion, taste and smell, corresponding to the existing senses of man. And the next characteristic it develops, let us call it for the moment permeability, will correspond to the next sense of man, which we may call normal clairvoyance. Thus, when some bold thinkers have been thirsting for a fourth dimension, to explain the passage of matter through matter, and the production of knots upon an endless cord, they have been in want of a sixth characteristic of matter. The three dimensions belong really to only one attribute, or characteristic, of matter: extension, and popular common sense justly rebels against the idea that, under any condition of things, there can be more than three of such dimensions as length, breadth and thickness. These terms, and the term dimension itself, all belong to one plane of thought, to one stage of evolution, to one characteristic of matter. So long as there are foot rules within the resources of cosmos to apply to matter, so long will they be able to measure it three ways and no more, just as, from the time the idea of measurement first occupied a place in the human understanding, it has been possible to apply measurement in three directions and no more. But these considerations do not in any way militate against a certainty that, in the progress of time, as the faculties of humanity are multiplied, so will the characteristics of matter be multiplied also. Meanwhile, the expression is far more incorrect than even the familiar phrase of the sun's rising or setting. We now return to the consideration of material evolution through the rounds. Matter in the second round, it has been stated, may be figuratively referred to as two-dimensional. But here another caveat must be entered. This loose and figurative expression may be regarded on one plane of thought, as we have just seen, as equivalent to the second characteristic of matter, corresponding to the second perceptive faculty or sense of man. But these two linked scales of evolution are concerned with the processes going on within the limits of a single round. The succession of primary aspects of nature, with which the succession of rounds is concerned, has to do, as already indicated, with the development of the elements in the occult sense: fire, air, water, earth. We are only in the fourth round, and our catalogue so far stops short. The order in which these elements are mentioned, in the last sentence but one, is the correct one for esoteric purposes and in the secret teachings. Milton was right when he spoke of the powers of fire, air, water, earth. The earth, such as we know it now, had no existence before the fourth round, hundreds of millions of years ago, the commencement of our geological earth. The globe, says the commentary, was fiery, cool and radiant, as its ethereal men and animals, during the first round, a contradiction or paradox, in the opinion of our present science, luminous, and more dense and heavy, during the second round, watery during the third. Thus are the elements reversed. The centers of consciousness of the third round, destined to develop into humanity as we know it, arrived at a perception of the third element, water. If we had to frame our conclusions according to the data furnished us by geologists, then we would say that there was no real water, even during the Carboniferous period. We are told that gigantic masses of carbon, which existed formerly spread in the atmosphere as carbonic acid, were absorbed by plants, while a large proportion of that gas was mixed in the water. Now, if this be so, and we have to believe that all the carbonic acid which went to compose those plants that formed bituminous coal, lignite, etc., and went towards the formation of limestone, and so on, that all this was at that period in the atmosphere in gaseous form, then there must have been seas and oceans of liquid carbonic acid. But how then could the Carboniferous period be preceded by the Devonian and Silurian ages, those of fishes and mollusks, on that assumption? Barometric pressure, moreover, must have exceeded several hundred times the pressure of our present atmosphere. How could organisms, even so simple as those of certain fishes and mollusks, stand that? There is a curious work by Blanchard on the origin of life, wherein he shows some strange contradictions and confusions in the theories of his colleagues, and which we recommend to the reader's attention. Those of the fourth round have added earth as a state of matter to their stock, as well as the three other elements in their present transformation. In short, none of the so-called elements were, in the three preceding rounds, as they are now. For all we know, fire may have been pure akasha, the first matter of the magnum opus of the creators and builders, that astral light which the paradoxical Eliphas Levi calls in one breath the body of the Holy Ghost, and in the next Baphomet the androgyne goat of Mendes, air, simply nitrogen, the breath of the supporters of the heavenly dome, as the Mahometan mystics call it, water. That primordial fluid which was required, according to Moses, to make a living soul. And this may account for the flagrant discrepancies and unscientific statements found in Genesis. Separate the first from the second chapter, read the former as a scripture of the Elohists, and the latter as that of the far later Jehovists. Still one finds, if one reads between the lines, the same order in which created things appear, namely, fire, light, air, water, and man, or earth. For the sentence of the first chapter, the Elohistic, "In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth," is a mistranslation. It is not the heaven and the earth, but the duplex, or dual, heaven, the upper and the lower heavens, or the separation of primordial substance, that was light in its upper, and dark in its lower portions, the manifested universe, in its duality of the invisible, to the senses, and the visible to our perceptions. God divided the light from the darkness, and then made the firmament, air. Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters, i.e., the waters which were under the firmament are manifested visible universe from the waters which were above the firmament up to us, invisible planes of being. In the second chapter, the Jehovistic, plants and herbs are created before water, just as in the first, light is produced before the sun. God made the earth and the heavens, and every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew. For the Lord God Elohim had not caused it to rain upon the earth, etc. An absurdity, unless the esoteric explanation is accepted. The plants were created before they were in the earth, for there was no earth then such as it is now. And the herb of the field was in existence before it grew as it does now, in the fourth round. Discussing and explaining the nature of the invisible elements and the primordial fire mentioned above, Eliphaz Levi invariably calls it the astral light. With him it is the grand agent magique. Undeniably it is so, but only so far as black magic is concerned, and on the lowest planes of what we call ether, the noumenon of which is akasha, and even this would be held incorrect by orthodox occultists. The astral light is simply the older sidereal light of Paracelsus, and to say that everything which exists has been evolved from it, and it preserves and reproduces all forms as he does, is to enunciate truth only in the second proposition. The first is erroneous, for if all that exists was evolved through, or via, it, this is not the astral light, since the latter is not the container of all things, but, at best, only the reflector of this all. Eliphaz Levi very truly shows it a force in nature by means of which a single man who can master it might throw the world into confusion and transform its face, for it is the great arcanum of transcendent magic. Quoting the words of the great Western Kabbalist in their translated form, we may, perhaps, the better explain them by the occasional addition of a word or two, to show the difference between Western and Eastern explanations of the same subject. The author says of the great magic agent, "This ambient and all-penetrating fluid, this ray detached from the central or spiritual sun's splendor fixed by the weight of the atmosphere, and the power of central attraction, the astral light, this electromagnetic ether, this vital and luminous caloric, is represented on ancient monuments by the girdle of Isis, which twines round two Pallas, and in ancient theogonies by the serpent devouring its own tail, emblem of prudence, and of Saturn, emblem of infinity, immortality, and Cronus, time, not the god Saturn or the planet. It is the winged dragon of Medea, the double serpent of the Caduceus, and the tempter of Genesis, but it is also the brazen snake of Moses encircling the Tau. Lastly, it is the devil of exoteric dogmatism, and is really the blind force. It is not blind, and Levi knew it, which souls must conquer, in order to detach themselves from the chains of earth, for if they should not, they will be absorbed by the same power which first produced them, and will return to the central and eternal fire. This great Arceus is now publicly discovered by, and for, only one man, J.W. Keeley, of Philadelphia. For others, however, it is discovered, yet must remain almost useless. So far shalt thou go. All the above is as practical as it is correct, save one error, which we have explained. Eliphas Levi commits a great blunder in always identifying the astral light with what we call Akasha. What it really is will be expounded in Volume 2. Eliphas Levi further writes, "The great magic agent is the fourth emanation of the life principle. We say it is the first in the inner, and the second in the outer, our universe, of which the sun is the third form, for the day star, the sun, is only the reflection and material shadow of the central sun of truth, which illuminates the intellectual invisible world of spirit, and which itself is but a gleam borrowed from the absolute." So far he is right enough. But when the great authority of the Western Kabbalists adds that, nevertheless, it is not the immortal spirit, as the Indian hierophants have imagined, we answer that he slanders the said hierophants, as they have said nothing of the kind, for even the Puranic exoteric writings flatly contradict the assertion. No Hindu has ever mistaken Prakriti, the astral light, being only above the lowest plane of Prakriti, the material cosmos, for the immortal spirit. Prakriti is ever called Maya, illusion, and is doomed to disappear with the rest, the gods included, at the hour of the pralaya. As it is shown that Akasha is not even the ether, least of all then, we imagine, can it be the astral light. Those unable to penetrate beyond the dead letter of the Puranas have occasionally confused Akasha with Prakriti, with ether, and even with the visible sky. It is true also that those who have invariably translated the term Akasha by Ether Wilson, for instance, finding it called the material cause of sound possessing, moreover, this one single property, have ignorantly imagined it to be material in the physical sense. True, again, that if the characteristics are accepted literally, then, since nothing material or physical, and therefore conditioned and temporary, can be immortal according to metaphysics and philosophy, it would follow that Akasha is neither infinite nor immortal. But all this is erroneous, since both the words pradhana, primeval matter, and sound, as a property, have been misunderstood, the former term, pradhana, being certainly synonymous with Mulaprakriti and Akasha, and the latter, sound, with the verbum, the word or the logos. This is easy to demonstrate, for it is shown in the following sentence from Vishnu Purana. "There was neither day nor night, nor sky, nor earth, nor darkness, nor light, nor any other thing, save only one, unapprehensible by intellect, or that which is Brahman, and Pums, spirit, and pradhana, primordial matter." Now, what is pradhana, if it is not Mulaprakriti, the root of all, in another aspect? For though pradhana is said, further on, to merge into the deity, as everything else does, in order to leave the one absolute during the pralaya, yet is it held as infinite and immortal. The literal translation is given as one pradhanika Brahma spirit. That was, and the commentator interprets the compound term as a substantive, not as a derivative word used attributively, i.e., like something conjoined with pradhana. The student has to note, moreover, that the Puranic is a dualistic system, not evolutionary, and that, in this respect, far more will be found, from an esoteric standpoint, in the Sankhya and even in the Manava Dharma Shastra, however much the latter differs from the former. Hence Pradhana, even in the Puranas, is an aspect of Parabrahman, not an evolution, and must be the same as the Vedantic Mula Prakriti. Prakriti, in its primary state, is Akasha, says a Vedantin scholar. It is almost abstract nature. Akasha, then, is Pradhana in another form, and as such cannot be ether, the ever-invisible agent, courted even by physical science. Nor is it astral light. It is, as said, the noumenon of the sevenfold differentiated Prakriti, the ever-immaculate mother of the fatherless son, who becomes father on the lower manifested plane. For Mahat is the first product of Pradhana, or Akasha, and Mahat universal intelligence, whose characteristic property is but he is no other than the Logos, for he is called Ishvara, Brahma, Bhava. He is, in short, the creator or the divine mind in creative operation, the cause of all things. He is the firstborn of whom the Puranas tell us that earth and Mahat are the inner and outer boundaries of the universe, or, in our language, the negative and the positive poles of dual nature, abstract and concrete, for the Purana adds. In this manner as were the seven forms principles of Prakriti reckoned from Mahat to earth, so at the time of elemental dissolution, Pratyahara, these seven successively re-enter into each other. The egg of Brahma, Sarvamandala, is dissolved, with its seven zones, Vipa, seven oceans, seven regions. These are the reasons why the occultists refuse to give the name of astral light to Akasha, or to call it ether. In my father's house are many mansions may be contrasted with the occult saying, in our mother's house are seven mansions or planes, the lowest of which is above and around us the astral light. The elements, whether simple or compound, could not have remained the same since the commencement of the evolution of our chain. Everything in the universe progresses steadily in the great cycle, while incessantly going up and down in the smaller cycles. Nature is never stationary during Manvantara, as it is ever becoming, not simply being, and mineral, vegetable, and human life are always adapting their organisms to the then reigning elements, and therefore those elements were then fitted for them, as they are now for the life of present humanity. It will only be in the next, or fifth, round that the fifth element, ether, the gross body of Akasha, if it can be called even that, will, by becoming a familiar fact of nature to all men, as air is familiar to us now, cease to be, as at present, hypothetical and an agent for so many things. And only during that round will those higher senses, the growth and development of which Akasha subserves, be susceptible of a complete expansion. As already indicated, a partial familiarity with the characteristic of matter permeability, which should be developed concurrently with the sixth sense, may be expected to develop at the proper period in this round. But with the next element added to our resources, in the next round, permeability will become so manifest a characteristic of matter that the densest forms of this round will seem to man's perceptions as obstructive to him as a thick fog, and no more. Let us now return to the life cycle. Without entering at length upon the description given of the higher lives, we must direct our attention, at present, simply to the earthly beings and the earth itself. The latter, we are told, is built up for the first round by the devourers, which disintegrate and differentiate the germs of other lives in the elements, pretty much, it must be supposed, as in the present stage of the world, the Arabs do, when, undermining and loosening the chemical structure in an organism, they transform animal matter, and generate substances that vary in their constitutions. Thus occultism disposes of the so-called Esoteric age of science, for it shows that there never was a time when the earth was without life upon it. Wherever there is an atom of matter, a particle, or a molecule, even in its most gaseous condition, there is life in it, however latent and unconscious. Whatsoever quits the laya state becomes active life. It is drawn into the vortex of motion, the alchemical solvent of life. Spirit and matter are the two states of the one, which is neither spirit nor matter, both being the absolute life, latent. Spirit is the first differentiation of and in space, and matter the first differentiation of spirit. That which is neither spirit nor matter, that is it, the causeless cause of spirit and matter, which are the cause of cosmos, and that we call the one life, or the intracosmic breath. Once more we say like must produce like. Absolute life cannot produce an inorganic atom, whether single or complex, and there is life even in laya, just as a man in a profound cataleptic state to all appearance a corpse is still a living being. When the devourers in whom the men of science are invited to see, with some show of reason, atoms of the fire mist, if they will, as the occultist will offer no objection to this, when the devourers, we say, have differentiated the fire atoms by a peculiar process of segmentation, the latter become life germs, which aggregate according to the laws of cohesion and affinity. Then the life germs produce lives of another kind, which work on the structure of our globes. Thus, in the first round, the globe, having been built by the primitive fire lives, i.e., formed into a sphere, had no solidity, no qualifications, save a cold brightness, no form, no color. It is only towards the end of the first round that it developed one element, which, from its inorganic, so to say, or simple essence, has become now, in our round, the fire we know throughout the system. The earth was in her first rupa, the essence of which is the Akashic principle, named that which is now known as, and very erroneously termed, astral light, which Eliphas Levi calls the imagination of nature, probably to avoid giving it its correct name, as others do. Speaking of it, in his preface to the Histoire de l'Imagie, Eliphas Levi says, "It is through this force that all the nervous centers secretly communicate with each other, from it that sympathy and antipathy are born, from it that we have our dreams, and that the phenomena of second sight and extranatural visions take place. Astral light, acting under the impulsion of powerful wills, destroys, coagulates, separates, breaks, gathers in all things. God created it on that day when he said, Fiat lux. It is directed by the egregores, i.e., the chiefs of the souls, who are the spirits of energy and action." Eliphas Levi ought to have added that the astral light, or primordial substance, if matter at all, is that which, called light, lux esoterically explained, is the body of those spirits themselves, and their very essence. Our physical light is the manifestation on our plane, and the reflected radiance, of the divine light, emanating from the collective body of those who are called the lights and the flames. But no other Kabbalist has ever had the talent of heaping up one contradiction on the other, of making one paradox chase another in the same sentence, and in such flowing language, as Eliphas Levi. He leads his reader through the most lovely valleys, to strand him after all on a desert and barren rock. Says the commentary, "It is through and from the radiations of the seven bodies of the seven orders of Dionys that the seven discrete quantities elements, whose motion and harmonious union produce the manifested universe of matter, are born. The second round brings into manifestation the second element, air, an element, the purity of which would ensure continuous life to him who would use it. In Europe there have been 2 occultists only who have discovered and even partially applied it in practice, though its composition has always been known among the highest Eastern initiates. The ozone of the modern chemists is poison compared with the real universal solvent, which could never be thought of unless it existed in nature. From the second round, Earth, hitherto a fetus in the matrix of space, began its real existence. It had developed individual sentient life, its second principle. The second corresponds to the sixth principle. The second is life continuous, the other, temporary. The third round developed the third principle, water, while the fourth transformed the gaseous fluids and plastic form of our globe into the hard-crusted, grossly material sphere we are living on. Bhumi has reached her fourth principle. To this it may be objected that the law of analogy, so much insisted upon, is broken. Not at all. Earth will reach her true ultimate form, her body shell, inversely in this to man, only toward the end of the Manvantara, after the seventh round. Eugenius Philolaus was right when he assured his readers, on his word of honor, that no one had yet seen the earth, i.e., matter in its essential form. Our globe is, so far, in its kamarupic state, the astral body of desires of ahamkara, dark egotism, the progeny of Mahat, on the lower plane. It is not molecularly constituted matter, least of all the human body, stula sharira, that is the grossest of all our principles, but verily the middle principle, the real animal center, whereas our body is but its shell, the irresponsible factor and medium through which the beast in us acts all its life. Every intellectual theosophist will understand my real meaning. Thus the idea that the human tabernacle is built by countless lives, just in the same way as was the rocky crust of our earth, has nothing repulsive in it for the true mystic. Nor can science oppose the occult teaching, for it is not because the microscope will ever fail to detect the ultimate living atom or life that it can reject the doctrine. See, science teaches us that the living as well as the dead organisms of both man and animal are swarming with bacteria of 100 various kinds, that from without we are threatened with the invasion of microbes with every breath we draw, and from within by leucomanes, Arabs, anaerobes, and what not. But science has never yet gone so far as to assert with the occult doctrine that our bodies, as well as those of animals, plants, and stones, are themselves altogether built up of such beings, which, with the exception of the larger species, no microscope can detect. So far as regards the purely animal and material portion of man, science is on its way to discoveries that will go far towards corroborating this theory. Chemistry and physiology are the 2 great magicians of the future, which are destined to open the eyes of mankind to great physical truths. With every day, the identity between the animal and physical man, between the plant and man, and even between the reptile and its nest, the rock, and man is more and more clearly shown. The physical and chemical constituents of all being found to be identical, chemical science may well say that there is no difference between the matter which composes the ox and that which forms man. But the occult doctrine is far more explicit. It says, not only the chemical compounds are the same, but the same infinitesimal invisible lives compose the atoms of the bodies of the mountain and the daisy, of man and the ant, of the elephant and of the tree which shelters it from the sun. Each particle, whether you call it organic or inorganic, is a life. Every atom and molecule in the universe is both life-giving and death-giving to such forms, inasmuch as it builds by aggregation universes and the ephemeral vehicles ready to receive the transmigrating soul, and as eternally destroys and changes the forms and expels the souls from their temporary abodes. It creates and kills. It is self-generating and self-destroying. It brings into being and annihilates that mystery of mysteries, the living body of man, animal or plant, every second in time and space, and it generates equally life and death, beauty and ugliness, good and bad, and even the agreeable and disagreeable, the beneficent and maleficent sensations. It is that mysterious life, represented collectively by countless myriads of lives, that follows in its own sporadic way the hitherto incomprehensible law of atavism, that copies family resemblances, as well as those it finds impressed in the aura of the generators of every future human being, a mystery, in short, that will receive fuller attention elsewhere. For the present, one instance may be cited in illustration. Modern science is beginning to find out that ptomaine, the alkaloid poison generated by decaying corpses and matter alike, also extracted with the help of volatile ether, yields a smell as strong as that of the freshest orange blossoms, but that free from oxygen. Such alkaloids yield either a most sickening, disgusting smell or a most agreeable aroma, which recalls that of the most delicately scented flowers, and it is suspected that such blossoms owe their agreeable smell to the poisonous ptomaine. The venomous essence of certain fungi, also, is nearly identical with the venom of the cobra of India, the most deadly of serpents. The French savants Arnaud, Gaudier, and Villiers have found in the saliva of living men the same venomous alkaloid as in that of the toad, the salamander, the cobra, and the trigonocephalus of Portugal. It is proven that venom of the deadliest kind, whether called ptomaine or leucomane or alkaloid, is generated by living men, animals and plants. Gaudier also discovered an alkaloid in the fresh carcass and brains of an ox, and a venom which he calls xanthocreatinine, similar to the substance extracted from the poisonous saliva of reptiles. It is the muscular tissues, the most active organs in the animal economy, that are suspected of being the generators or factors of venoms, which have the same importance as carbonic acid and urea in the functions of life, and are the ultimate products of inner combustion. And though it is not yet fully determined whether poisons can be generated by the animal systems of living beings without the participation and interference of microbes, it is ascertained that the animal does produce venomous substances in its physiological or living state. Thus, having discovered the effects, science has to find their primary causes, and this it can never do without the help of the old sciences, of alchemy, occult botany and physics. We are taught that every physiological change, in addition to pathological phenomena, diseases, nay, life itself, or rather the objective phenomena of life, produced by certain conditions and changes in the tissues of the body, which allow and force life to act in that body, that all this is due to those unseen creators and destroyers which are called, in such a loose and general way, microbes. It might be supposed that these fiery lives and the microbes of science are identical. This is not true. The fiery lives are the seventh and highest subdivision of the plane of matter, and correspond in the individual with the one life of the universe, though only on that plane of matter. The microbes of science are the first and lowest subdivision on the second plane, that of material prana, or life. The physical body of man undergoes a complete change of structure every 7 years, and its destruction and preservation are due to the alternate functions of the fiery lives as destroyers and builders. They are builders by sacrificing themselves, in the form of vitality, to restrain the destructive influence of the microbes, and, by supplying the microbes with what is necessary, they compel them under that restraint to build up the material body and its cells. They are destroyers also, when that restraint is removed, and the microbes, unsupplied with vital constructive energy, are left to run riot as destructive agents. Thus, during the first half of a man's life, the first 5 periods of 7 years each, the fiery lives are indirectly engaged in the process of building up man's material body. Life is on the ascending scale, and the force is used in construction and increase. After this period is past, the age of retrogression commences, and, the work of the fiery lives exhausting their strength, the work of destruction and decrease also commences. An analogy between cosmic events and the descent of spirit into matter, for the first half of a Manvantara, planetary as well as human, and its ascent, at the expense of matter, in the second half, may here be traced. These considerations have to do solely with the plane of matter, but the restraining influence of the fiery lives on the lowest subdivision of the second plane, the microbes, is confirmed by the fact mentioned in the theory of Pasteur above referred to, that the cells of the organs, when they do not find sufficient oxygen for themselves, adapt themselves to that condition and form ferments, which, by absorbing oxygen from substances which come in contact with them, produce their destruction. Thus the process is commenced by one cell, robbing its neighbor of the source of its vitality, when the supply is insufficient, and the destruction so commenced steadily progresses. Such experimenters as Pasteur are the best friends and helpers of the destroyers, and the worst enemies of the creators if the latter were not at the same time destroyers also. However it may be, one thing is certain in this. The knowledge of these primary causes, and of the ultimate essence of every element, of its lives, their functions, properties, and conditions of change constitutes the basis of magic. Paracelsus was, perhaps, the only occultist in Europe during the latter centuries of the Christian era who was versed in this mystery. Had not a criminal hand put an end to his life years before the time allotted him by nature, physiological magic would have fewer secrets for the civilized world than it now has. But what is the moon to do in all this, we may be asked. What have fish, sin and soma moon in the apocalyptic sentence of the stanza, to do in company with the life microbes? With the latter nothing, except that they availed themselves of the tabernacle of clay prepared by them, with divine perfect man everything, since fish, sin and moon conjointly compose the 3 symbols of the immortal being. This is all that can be given. Nor does the writer pretend to know more of these strange symbols than may be inferred about them from exoteric religions, from the mystery, perhaps, which underlies the Matsya, fish, avatara of Vishnu, the Chaldean owns, the man-fish, recorded in the imperishable sign of the zodiac, Pisces, and running throughout the 2 testaments in the personages of Joshua son of Nun, the fish and Jesus, from the allegorical sin or fall of spirit into matter, and from the moon in so far as it relates to the lunar ancestors, the Pitras. For the present, it may be as well to remind the reader that while the moon goddesses were connected in every mythology, especially the Grecian, with childbirth, because of the influence of the moon on women and conception, The occult and actual connection of our satellite with fecundation is to this day unknown to physiology, which regards every popular practice in this connection as gross superstition. As it is useless to discuss these in detail, we can only stop for the present and notice the lunar symbology casually, to show that the said superstition belongs to the most ancient beliefs, and even to Judaism, the basis of Christianity. With the Israelites, the chief function of Jehovah was child-giving, and the esotericism of the Bible, interpreted Kabbalistically, shows undeniably that the Holy of Holies in the temple was simply the symbol of the womb. This is now proven beyond doubt and cavil by the numerical reading of the Bible in general, and of Genesis especially. This idea must certainly have been borrowed by the Jews from the Egyptians and Indians, whose Holy of Holies is symbolized by the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid, and the yoni symbols of exoteric Hinduism. To make the matter clearer, and to show at the same time the enormous difference in the spirit of interpretation and the original meaning of the same symbols between the ancient Eastern occultists and the Jewish Kabbalists, we refer the reader to the section on the Holy of Holies in the second volume. Phallic worship has developed only with the loss of the keys to the true meaning of the symbols. It was the last and most fatal turning from the highway of truth and divine knowledge into the side path of fiction, raised into dogma through human falsification and hierarchic ambition. 6. From the firstborn, the thread between the silent watcher and his shadow becomes more strong and radiant with every change. The morning sunlight is changed into noonday glory. This sentence, the thread between the silent watcher and his shadow man, becomes more strong with every change, is another psychological mystery that will find its explanation in Volume 2. For the present, it will suffice to say that the watcher and his shadows, the latter numbering as many as there are reincarnations for the monad, are one. The watcher, or the divine prototype, is at the upper rung of the ladder of being, the shadow, at the lower. Withal, the monad of every living being, unless his moral turpitude breaks the connection, and he runs loose and astray into the lunar path, to use the occult expression, as an individual Dayan Chohan, distinct from others, with a kind of spiritual individuality of its own, during one special Manvantara. Its primary, the spirit Atman, is one, of course, with the one universal spirit, Paramatma, but the vehicle, Vahan, it is enshrined in, the body, is part and parcel of that Dayan Chahanic essence, and it is in this that lies the mystery of that ubiquity, which was discussed a few pages back. My Father, that is in heaven, and I are one, says the Christian scripture. And in this, at any rate, it is the faithful echo of the esoteric tenet. 7. This is thy present wheel, said the flame to the spark. Thou art myself, my image and my shadow. I have clothed myself in thee, and thou art my Vahan, to the day be with us, when thou shalt become myself and others, thyself and I, A. Then the builders, having donned their first clothing, descend on radiant earth, and reign over men who are themselves, B. A. The day when the spark will become the flame, when man will merge into his Dayan Chohan, myself and others, thyself and I, as the stanza has it, means that in Parinirvana, when Pralaya will have reduced not only material and psychical bodies, but even the spiritual egos, to their original principle, the past, present, and even future humanities, like all things, will be one and the same. Everything will have re-entered the great breath. In other words, everything will be merged in Brahman, or the divine unity. Is this annihilation, as some think? are atheism, as other critics the worshippers of a personal deity, and believers in an unphilosophical paradise are inclined to suppose? Neither. It is worse than useless to return to the question of implied atheism, in that which is spirituality of a most refined character. To see in nirvana annihilation amounts to saying of a man plunged in a sound dreamless sleep one that leaves no impression on the physical memory and brain, because the sleeper's higher self is then in its original state of absolute consciousness that he, too, is annihilated. The latter simile answers to one side of the question only the most material, since reabsorption is by no means such a dreamless sleep but, on the contrary, absolute existence, an unconditioned unity or a state, to describe which human language is absolutely and hopelessly inadequate. The only approach to anything like a comprehensive conception of it can be attempted solely in the panoramic visions of the soul, through spiritual ideations of the divine monad. Nor is the individuality nor even the essence of the personality, if any be left behind, lost, because reabsorbed. For, however limitless from a human standpoint, the paranirvanic state, yet it has a limit in eternity. Once reached, the same monad will re-emerge therefrom, as a still higher being, on a far higher plane, to recommence its cycle of perfected activity. The human mind, in its present stage of development, cannot transcend, scarcely can it reach this plane of thought. It totters here, on the brink of incomprehensible absoluteness and eternity. B. The Watchers reign over men during the whole period of Satya Yuga and the smaller subsequent yugas, down to the beginning of the third root race, after which it is the patriarchs, heroes, and the manes, as in the Egyptian dynasties enumerated by the priests to Solon, the incarnated Dionys of a lower order, up to King Menes and the human kings of other nations. All were carefully recorded. In the views of symbologists, this mythopoeic age is of course regarded as only a fairy tale. But since traditions and even chronicles of such dynasties of divine kings, of gods reigning over men, followed by dynasties of heroes or giants, exist in the annals of every nation, it is difficult to understand how all the peoples under the sun, some of whom are separated by vast oceans and belong to different hemispheres, such as the ancient Peruvians and Mexicans, as well as the Chaldeans, could have worked out the same fairy tales in the same order of events. However, as the secret doctrine teaches history which, although esoteric and traditional, is nonetheless more reliable than profane history, we are entitled to our beliefs as much as anyone else, whether religionist or skeptic. And that doctrine says that the Dhyani Buddhas of the two higher groups, namely, the Watchers or the Architects, furnish the many and various races with divine kings and leaders. It is the latter who taught humanity their arts and sciences, and the former who revealed to the incarnated monads that had just shaken off their vehicles of the lower kingdoms, and who had, therefore, lost every recollection of their divine origin, the great spiritual truths of the transcendental worlds. Thus, as expressed in the stanza, the Watchers descend on radiant earth and reign over men, who are themselves. The reigning kings had finished their cycle on earth and other worlds, in the preceding rounds. In the future Manvantaras they will have risen to higher systems than our planetary world, and it is the elect of our humanity, the pioneers on the hard and difficult path of progress, who will take the places of their predecessors. The next great Manvantara will witness the men of our own life cycle, becoming the instructors and guides of a mankind whose monads may now be still imprisoned semi-conscious and, the most intellectual of the animal kingdom, while their lower principles may be animating, perhaps, the highest specimens of the vegetable world. Thus proceed the cycles of the septenary evolution, in sevenfold nature, the spiritual or divine, the psychic or semi-divine, the intellectual, the passional, the instinctual or cognitional, the semi-corporeal, and the purely material or physical natures. All these evolve and progress cyclically, passing from one into another, in a double, centrifugal and centripetal way, one in their ultimate essence, seven in their aspects. The lowest, of course, is that depending upon and subservient to our five physical senses, which are in truth seven, as shown later, on the authority of the oldest Upanishads. Thus far, for individual, human, sentient, animal and vegetable life, each the microcosm of its higher macrocosm. The same for the universe, which manifests periodically, for purposes of the collective progress of the countless lives, the outbreathings of the one life, in order that, through the ever-becoming, every cosmic atom in this infinite universe, passing from the formless and the intangible, through the mixed natures of the semi-terrestrial, down to matter in full generation, and then back again, reascending at each new period higher and nearer the final goal, that each atom, we say, may reach, through individual merits and efforts, that plane where a tree becomes the one unconditioned all. But between the Alpha and the Omega, there is the weary road hedged in by thorns, that goes down first, then winds uphill all the way, yes, to the very end. Starting upon the long journey immaculate, descending more and more into sinful matter, and having connected himself with every atom in manifested space the pilgrim, having struggled through, and suffered in, every form of life and being, is only at the bottom of the valley of matter, and half through his cycle, when he has identified himself with collective humanity. This, he has made in his own image. In order to progress upwards and homewards, the god has now to ascend the weary uphill path of the Golgotha of life. It is the martyrdom of self-conscious existence. Like the Shvakerman, he has to sacrifice himself to himself in order to redeem all creatures, to resurrect from the many into the one life. Then he ascends into heaven indeed, where, plunged into the incomprehensible absolute being and bliss of paranirvana, he reigns unconditionally, and whence he will redescend again, at the next coming, which one portion of humanity expects in its dead-letter sense, as the second advent and the other as the last Kalki Avatara. And that's not all, our experts and regular viewers respond to all comments. Also check if you forgot to subscribe and set your bell to receive notifications about new audiobooks and other useful self-development materials that we release regularly. Join in the discussions, don't forget to give likes and, if possible and inspired, support the development of the channel financially. All useful links will be in the description and the first attached comment. Goodness, love and wisdom to all. And now move on to watch the next part of the video at the links below, or choose something from the playlists of the channel and those you see on the screen.